they worked towards a no increase in the mill rate. And to achieve that, they took some items off of the proposed operating budget, the proposed capital budget, and then the remainder from town reserves. So in terms of further operating budget assumptions that we had to look at was about approximately, exactly 120,000. And so I guess first I'll hand it over to Bill and we'll go through, I think the administration have worked several weeks to really come up with those adjustments that added up to 120,000. Bill will go through them, I guess, with Phil. We'll discuss them and move to, if everyone agrees, move to a vote on approving the operating budget, and then move to the capital budget. Bill, can I kind of leave it with you to take us through it?
Or sure. Phil? Yeah, I'll start, and then Ken and Phil, in a planned way, will give detail. And board, Tony thought, even though this is fairly straightforward, we would give you explanation on each line item. We'll get all the way through that, and then after that, there may be questions. This no set of reductions is easy. This 120 and their ins and outs here was not easy, and I want to thank Phil and the cabinet and the principals who are on for working through this with us. There are two academic effects here. Ken will speak to those. The key verb there in front of those is pause, which Ken will explain. We're very much hoping, and the principals will advocate with us, that when we get towards FY22, if that's the next moment, we want to stop pausing those two items. Ken will explain those. That's the K2 world language and the K2 computer teacher. The high school FTE reduction, if Lisa's not on, and it's an incredibly busy week, so she may not, that Ken can speak to those as well. Then the salary savings, Phil can explain that. Then down below, there's some ins and outs with repairs and maintenance. Phil can also explain those. Quite a significant savings for transportation that some combination of Phil and Mike can explain is necessary. And so once we get through all that, which we should move pretty quickly through, we can respond to questions. Let me flag, though, at the bottom beneath the chart, and I assume you all have that. It's also posted. There's two notes. One on enrollment is most significant. We are within one, and excuse the typo, we're within one student of going over our third grade guidelines. Cohorts matter. That's a cohort that we as educators are going to say really should not have larger class sizes than average. But that'll be a question we think before the board fairly soon. And Ken will be speaking a little bit to that as it relates to some of these other reductions. I also would flag for you, for no doubt a later conversation of some intensity, is potential COVID-19 expenditures. This is a listing of line items, areas that Phil's tracking, and the finance committee members know that we dug into that today, at least the larger issues there, in some detail, and said we were tracking this. So let me stop and then just have Ken, if you could start through on the academic lines here. Then Phil will come back in on the others, and then Mike is necessary on that transportation. You can help there, and then we'll open up for questions if that makes sense to the board. Okay, so Ken, you're up, please.
Can you hear me? Great. So just a little background, as Tony and Bill said, we've been working on these with principals and cabinet for a few weeks. There are really three areas we went to. Had anything else emerged since the budget process when we met in January that were new opportunities? So you think you look at two items in particular. One of those is the turnover savings with the departure of Mike Rizzo and Craig Tunks. Then we went and looked at, after the scheduling process at the high school, the way the student course requests played out. We were able to be more efficient with staff as a result of that. So in terms of Lisa and how the courses, in terms of the number of sections broke, we had a 0.5 FTE reduction at the high school. So, consider those areas that, were new opportunities that we look to address, the needs. And Phil, obviously, in facilities, and Mike in transportation for ESY, found some other opportunities as well. So that then led to us thinking about, given the COVID situation, again, post-budget process, are there any areas where, knowing that we may be in a hybrid or distance learning environment again, where we might, pause a particular program, and that speaks, to K2 Spanish, which I'll get into in a second. And then the third thing that we were sort of using as a guide for these reductions was, are there any current openings, positions due to retirements or things of that nature that either we could not fill or pause as well? And that is where the K2 computer position came in. And so, with those three areas, I think that sort of frames sort of how we approach it. We went back to the 0% list, obviously. Some of these things, like the K2 Spanish, go back to the 0% list, which we've talked about before. But getting into Spanish, this was a strategy that was used several years ago when the program was in transition. And the downside is we paused for a year, and the upside is we focus more on literacy. When we get back to face-to-face learning, hopefully in this coming year, at some point, that gives teachers an additional 10 minutes a day where they can deliver literacy instruction to maybe regain some of the time that we've lost. We would look at that program again for the FY22 budget, and consider, does it make sense to bring that back? Off of a year of again trying to focus on the literacy, and also knowing that it's a challenging program to deliver. Although I think our K2 K5 Spanish teachers have been doing a great job to create videos that parents can access, but the priority has been obviously with literacy as our focus. Then, in terms of computers, as I said, we had a retirement. Gary Webster retired, and he was in that role teaching 0.5 computers. And so, again, when we went into distance learning, we paused computer instruction. We redeployed Gary's position to provide some technology support. And so rather than going ahead and hiring for that position right now, the thinking is hold off, see if the need, how the need arises over time. And in the meantime, if we go back to face-to-face learning in the FY21 school year, then the impact would be on the library media specialist at Hurlbut. We would go back to a model where the library media specialist is teaching a special. Within the library, they're teaching a special. That's one thing we used to have years ago, where there were half hour once a week, class would come into the library for a lesson, and we would have to sit down with Sharon and with Laura and determine how best to structure that time in terms of what the focus is. But that would be, pause that for a year. It would be, when we do get back to face-to-face learning, the impact on Sharon is significant, in that she would be 0.5 of her day would be pretty much locked into that library with classes. And we certainly can speak more about that if there are questions. But it's a similar model to what we have at WIS, where Jane Sabini, our library media specialist there, teaches the trimester courses for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade as part of her schedule within the library when the kids come down. So that, and I think I mentioned to you, the 0.5 is just a true cut at the high school as a result of efficiency in scheduling, resulting from the scheduling process. And, you know, you have the turnover savings. And then if maybe Phil, you want to pick up with Mike, the transportation and the repairs and maintenance.
Sure. Mike, do you want to jump in on the transportation, or do you want me to take it? All right, I'll go through, and if we need Mike to backfill, we'll do that. So as Ken mentioned, during the entire budget process, and in light of COVID, we kind of took a step back and we looked at all of our expenditures or budgeted expenditure to see if we could identify any savings. So once the decision was made that we were going to continue ESY for our end district spread population, we look back on the budget and we've kind of just revamped it and say, you know what, if it's going to be ESY continue to be distance learning, we took a savings for that. In addition to the end district ESY transportation and also the out of district ESY transportation, we also took a look further on our original assumption for the students who would be transported out of district, and we identified, I think, maybe one or two students who we deemed at this point will not need those services in terms of transportation. It could be that the services may be needed in some other areas, but we felt confident enough to take a slight adjustment regarding the transportation portion for those services. Moving to repairs and maintenance. Once again, we just looked a little bit deeper into the budget and we identified certain line items where we think that if needed, we've been trending a little bit on the low end for these 3 line item: asbestos abatement, glass replacement, and playground repairs. The assumption here is that if we need to cover these items, we will find a way to cover them with our or through our repairs allowance account for a total of $15,000. Again, in light of COVID and not with the uncertainty around COVID and whether or not we were going to be in district or not, the assumption that we made for supplies was that even if we were on a hybrid situation, we probably will not need as much supplies as we had budgeted. So we pretty much just took a 2.5% district-wide reduction in all supplies. Dues and fees also related to this, not even COVID and social distancing. The assumption here is that we would not be participating as much in as many competition and the 10,000. So I just did a 10,000 reduction for dues and fees. The IT coordinator, we spoke about that. This is not a reduction. This is an add. This is pretty much an offset to the other reduction. As you guys know, we reinstated that IT coordinator position, and we would have started the year pretty much as a deficit. Or the plan was that we would cover that once we identified any areas that would have savings. So after we went through all of this, and the net savings was in the tune of roughly $250,000, which would be offset by the reinstatement of the IT coordinator position at 130, all in to get us with a net number of 120,000, or an additional reduction of a 0.23%.
I think we can open it up to questions.
Hey, it's Taffy. Question about the Spanish K-2. I'm, it's obviously a horrible thing to have to not, let our littlest people start language when they should, from an age appropriate standpoint, from a developmental standpoint, they should be starting at this age. But any thoughts on how to supplement that in some way through the infusion of it in other sections? So as they're learning reading, is there any way to continue to seed their interest or even just tease a bit of Spanish language between K to 12. I'll let Laura address this, or at least tell me your thoughts on this, Laura.
Yeah, we've thought about that. The short answer is not really. You know, when we get back, the focus really will be the literacy and the numeracy, and the classroom teachers just don't have that training and background in the language to be able to do that. And we won't have the staff who are bilingual to be able to do that. You know, we may be able to periodically include some Spanish language or, you know, the cultural part of it into all school assemblies. You know, we are committed to developing global citizens and, you know, I think now more than ever too, diversity and people around the world. This year we did start in partnership with Lisa Wallach at the high school, working with a school in Guatemala to be a sister school at the elementary level. A lot of that got put on hold because of what happened. But, you know, Lisa and I have talked about ways to connect our students to those students in Guatemala and to share some language, but we won't have the instructional piece, which is why I think it is really important to consider this as a pause to our program and to really commit to next year, bringing it back full force.
And don't get me wrong, I'm in favor of, I mean, I think this is a wise thing to do. And I think that from what we've heard from parents around their real concern that distance learning is most difficult for the littlest kids in our district, that focusing on the basics in September is absolutely critical. So I'm in full support of it. I just wondered whether there was any, you know, creative ideas that we could think through over the summer or in early September about, you know, keeping it alive. But I get it. I totally get it. Thank you.
Gina, you had a question?
Yeah, so I have a couple questions. So these are partial FTEs. Are we in a situation that we may potentially lose staff because we aren't able to give full FTE positions to them? And is that going to have a future impact on the district is the first question. And then the second question, with pausing like at K2, the world language, which I understand, you're now going to have that time available to devote to core literacy, but who's going to have the minutes available to do it? You know, part of the balance at Hurlbut was, you know, the specials teachers would be working with the students while the Hurlbut teachers had their team meetings, their planning time, and et cetera, et cetera. So if we're chopping out this teacher, how are we allocating the minutes?
So
I'll take that, Gina. The second question is the more straightforward one. The minutes do not come out of specials or world language at Hurlbut. It does at the WIS. So those 10 minutes actually are with the teacher in the classroom at Hurlbut, and it would not affect that distribution of minutes for prep time and instructional time. So the classroom teacher can pick that up, no problem. That's in line with contract. The second question or your original question is a little more difficult to answer at the moment, depending on what happens with that third grade section. If a third grade section comes to fruition and we're one away, and then, you know, this would not result in, you know, riffing in the district. And, you know, if, however, that position in third grade does not come to fruition, there is some possibility for that there could be some riffing or partial FTE loss by a teacher.
All right.
I mean, my sense over the last several years, and Laura, you can check on this, even Patty, if we're one out at this point, we will be adding a third grader. So I think not for the board to consider tonight, but I'll be very surprised if we're not coming back to you. And we can talk about that a little later, how we procedurally have done that, even if the board's in a hiatus for some portions of the summer, because it is a board decision. But I'm quite confident we will be back to you to pose the recommendation of, and it's a big one, but adding a section because of not wanting to go over class size guidelines in the third grade. But I don't know if Patty or Laura just want to give a historical sense. But again, one off, I'd be very surprised if we're not back to the board on this.
So, yes, I mean, would be rare for us not to add a student between now and the beginning of school. So with that in mind, if we're that close, why are we not at least analyzing the additional budget adjustments needed to be able to fund that teaching position? At least so we can evaluate everything together and not piecemeal.
Well, I mean, part of it was the commitment with the Board of Finance to come up with an additional 120. So I sort of somewhat concrete sequential was, let's resolve this, flag there's this possibility, because that will be into, then as you know, FY21 needs to cover. So it's sort of step by step. Let's resolve this, get this budget balanced, and then knowing we've got that plus the other potential set of expenses that could be much larger are COVID-19 related. So we've got a set of other costs coming at us.
Yeah, I would take it in a couple of steps. I think that the discussion of adding another section is, I think that's something that is probably going to be a longer discussion. I don't want to get ahead of the board and automatically say going to add another section, right? I think that's a topic
That's right.
that everyone is going to have to discuss. So, I think
I have no disagreement with that statement. Yeah. I guess my thought process is, while it is multiple steps, if you're going down a path with steps, you kind of want to have the plan in place so you can evaluate your whole path. You can get to a point where you're chunking things in very distinct pieces when in totality, they really should be discussed in a cohesive manner.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I don't think that there's nothing to stop us from approving this and then potentially, having another discussion and moving things around. I think we have to get the 120 done. And with more information, if we have to sit down and then find another way of getting to the 120 plus, I think that's fine too. I mean,
go ahead, Laura.
So I agree with Bill. It would be highly unusual between now and the beginning of the school year to not pick up several more students. I mean, one is kind of a given. I mean, none of us have a crystal ball. I can't guarantee it, but we do pick up students throughout the summer on a regular basis, and we're making decisions now about some of those classes. The longer we wait, the more, it's just difficult to try to form and place those classes right now.
Hey, Laura, does the fact that we will likely be in distance learning in September in any way alleviate the pressure of having a classroom size that is a little bigger than standard, or that we would choose to? In other words,
that's a good question. We did think about that and talk about that. One of the concerns and the challenges, I think, with the new school year is going to be developing community and relationships with student families. If that's being done in distance learning, I think that's we're going to have to really think about how to do that. And trying to connect with a larger class, I think, will be a little more challenging. When you have fewer students, you can spend more time reaching out, having conversations. One of the
but the actual learning time, maybe, first of all, only half the amount of kids in the classroom at any one time, as we discussed in the hybrid model. And certainly you don't have as many, the same kind of class management issues with a few extra children online, because they're already being managed mostly by, I'm presuming, their parents, as well as you online. I mean, I have no idea. Tell me if I'm off base here.
Yeah, I think, even when the students aren't in the classroom, there's a tremendous amount of communication and interaction with the parents at home and with the students. I think if we're doing a hybrid, that's going to be a big load. If, I mean, the amount of time the teachers are now spending with families, with students is, it's a lot. You know,
More
they're
than
working,
Yeah, if I may.
very long hours.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
kind of worry a little.
and right now they're dealing with families that they already had relationships with, students they already knew in the classroom, class community that was already established. And I think especially for a transitional year, going to a new building, you know, there's a little bit of nervousness around moving buildings, and now given the situation, the way the year closed and the possibility of the year opening in a new way, I think that's going to be that's going to need a lot of contact from those third grade teachers.
Thank you.
If I may, this is an excellent conversation here, and the exact conversation we have to have. I think at that point, when we're ready to discuss adding a section or not, we will then also have more clarity from the state in terms of what their plans are. I mean, the Finance Committee Chair, Vice Chair got an update from me earlier on things I've learned this morning in a regional call with superintendents and CAPS. That's why I think, Gina, right now, there's so much unknown, so much complexity. I think the administration's feeling is let's nail down decisions as we can. The decision now is, can we nail down this 120? Nobody's in love with this set of reductions, but it is a clear, definite set that we'd still have to do even with the section add. So my view is recommend to the board, you know, make this decision, you know, if you need another day, at least on this set of things, but we have to come back to you later when we know much more about whether we'll be in distance learning or not, which would influence that section question. I just think if we can nail this one down, then we're going to be back to you on a set of other issues related to the fall, which will include class size.
My feeling, yeah.
I mean, still, I'm the only board member with a child still in Hurlbut, and the you can call it what you want, pause or whatever for the K2 world language. I think, though, the optics of removing that program for a year is going to ring louder than the 10 minutes of literacy that the teacher is going to get back in the classroom. I don't think that I think that the parents will be in uproar about removing this program. You've got so many other schools that offer foreign language at this level, this grade level. And I've even had questions posed from parents in terms of these special teachers in Hurlbut. Where is the synchronous learning from them? Is there more opportunity to go into classrooms and still conduct those 10-minute or 15-minute Google Meets with children? I know you're calling it a pause, but the motivation on the street right now is obviously to get back into the schools as quickly as possible. So by you removing a program, parents are still going to say, but what if my child is still in school October through June? That means they're going to then lose Spanish for however many months. You know, by removing this program, we're basically putting a stake in the sand saying, we are not going to be in school for 50% or maybe more. Therefore, we're going to remove this program. And I think if you're going to put that stake in the sand now, you're going to get pushback from our parents.
If I could just share my thoughts, I know that I remember I was on the original committee that put the program in 1991. That's how old I am. And I understand what you're saying, Ruby, and I think I don't mean to overstep in saying that, that we all struggled with this as a group about the importance of language learning, the importance of, it's not just a cultural experience, but it's real language learning. And I think it could also be, I would not like to see it go. But I do think that there could be a way to frame it if indeed this is, a direction we have to go into. And that being that, I look as next year as numeracy and literacy as being really important for this part of the year this year. I know there is the great concern about students falling behind, starting later. And so next year, for however we're going to look at it, in some ways, I know at the high school, especially in math and world language, it's kind of a catch up to sort of fill in gaps. And so while it's not something that we want to see eliminated permanently at Hurl, but explaining it that the focus really has to be on that numeracy and literacy and making sure that our youngest learners have that strong foundation moving forward. And at the same time, I mean, I have been working with Laura closely about the working with the Guatemalan school. The Westport Rotary is very involved in it. We could assign specific classrooms of students there to kind of keep it going, if you will, and in some ways in a more authentic way. We also tried, as the administration knows, to get Spanish Guatemalan teachers here this November, and we were unsuccessful. The Rotary has now sponsored the grant. It's another year out, unfortunately, on pause because of COVID, but the goal is to bring 5 of those teachers through funding with Rotary International to work in Hurl, but with our teachers, hopefully, fingers crossed. So while it certainly is something we don't want to do, there could be an overall, looking beyond next year, plan to sort of explain how we are committed to this in the future, I guess I would say. That's just my thought.
Ken, can you talk about what the DIRG is doing on K through 2? I remember talking about it at the budget, but I don't remember all the details.
I haven't done a recent check of the DIRG, but the last time we took a look, most districts, I know Richfield does not do Spanish at all K-5. They're at one end of the spectrum. There are districts like New Canaan and Westport that do Spanish K-5. There are some like Wilton that don't necessarily start in kindergarten, start a little bit later. And I have heard recently that from the chair call this morning that Greenwich is looking at pausing Spanish as well, which is something that came up recently. So, within the DIRG, you've got more districts teaching Spanish in the elementary level than not. You've got one that doesn't do it at all, and you've got one that starts after kindergarten. I can't remember if it's in first, second, or third grade, though.
I'm kind of with Ruby on this one. I think the optics even behind it, especially, given that it's our ethos, I don't think it's going to go over well. Is there a way for us to collect that data to see, what all these DIRGs are doing? I know Ridgefield.
Hey,
Sure.
Just one thing. I mean, we're going to have a real logistical challenge when we come back in the fall, right? In whatever form we do. Do you really think with all that we need to catch up on in terms of our core curriculum, plus the logistical challenges of getting the kids back and settled in an environment that may be very different, do you really think this is going to be something that's going to be that sorely missed? I don't know. I mean, it's like, I might be missing something, but if you basically say we're not going to do it this year, there's a whole host of things that we have to be working on as a priority, but we're going to basically pick it up in future years. I guess I'm trying to understand where the big issue is.
So can I chime in here? I think that's a great point, but also I hear Ruby and Hillary, and I don't have a child in K-2 right now. And if I did, I would want everything for that child at the exact right developmental point in their learning trajectory. So I understand that anxiety of, are we missing out? And will my child miss out and not learn Spanish? And is that window of learning going to close in their little brain? before third grade or second grade. And so I think that we should be thinking about this question not in terms of how it's going to go over with parents, but rather what the child desperately needs and doesn't desperately need at this point. So, in other words, will they be able to be proficient in Spanish if they miss out on world language this year and next year? And I think the answer is yes. I think they will absolutely be proficient in Spanish if they start in third grade or fourth grade or second grade, as the case may be. And that's the case we need to make to parents, that what is critical that they not get behind on right now is early literacy and numeracy, without question.
No, I don't.
If they have to wait for Spanish, they won't lose the opportunity to be proficient in Spanish. I know from my background, and anyone can, dispute how it feels, but as far as the child, they need to be reading and writing right away. And would it be great if they were doing it in 2 languages? Absolutely. So
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I just have to interject here. The goal, the motivation is not that they need to start younger to get to a certain place by 9th grade. The motivation comes from where they are today and what their portfolio looks like, so that it is not just writing, reading, and arithmetic. It is writing, reading, arithmetic, and Spanish, and music, and it all encompassing for where he is today.
No, I get that, except that we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're compromised, and there are compromises all around. Like, there are things that our high school students were not able to do this year that they should have been able to do in order to really round out a fully well-rounded junior and senior year. But we had to make some compromises, and it's kind of within that I'm thinking about it. I mean, what are the critical things that those seniors, those middle schoolers, those WIS kids, we're in the middle of a crisis. So what do they have to have, and what can we wait on? And I know it's so hard. I hear you, Ruby. I completely understand that in an ideal world, you want the whole portfolio. But in an era where we're having to compromise this year, what is in the best interest of the child under the circumstances of the pandemic?
Well, let me ask another question. If this wasn't a budget, let's say you found the $45,000 somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Was this still just given what you're faced next year? Would this still be a decision you would make to pause?
Is that directed across the
that's
board?
directed at
That's a Ken question.
Laura,
Laura, yeah.
Bill, basically, let's say you just had to figure out how to make things work in the fall, and there's certain things you would do, and there's certain things you kind of say, listen, we just can't fit it in the fall. Is this an issue of money, or is ultimately an issue that you would actually choose to do, just given the fact of given some forward look on how you basically need to deliver things in the fall?
I have a thought. I have an answer, and then others can chime in. I think actually what Taffy said in the last couple of minutes, I think hits the nail on the head, that none of us want to see this reduction. Witness Greenwich, which actually does have an award-winning world language program, they're making the same decision right now for the same reasons. Nobody wants to do this. We agree with the Ruby portfolio point for our younger students. They even, but it's one that we say, if you don't do this 43,000, we're going elsewhere in the academic program, because that's where we are now. Remember, through the very, extensive work we've done with you as a board since January, we've gone everywhere we can, but into the academic area. Here, we're just along the edges, and that verb pause is critical. If we don't do this 43, we likely will have to go somewhere else in the academic program. We don't want to, but that's kind of where we are. I mean, there may be some additional Salary savings, we're not sure though. That's a kind of a guess, and it's just trying to get to the 120. So
Well, I guess that's not really what I asked, Bill. I said, if you basically if you're basically going to have a classroom where there's 10 kids in a class, you're going to have to spread them out, right? Would you be delivering world language next year?
So you want me to answer, Bill?
Yeah.
So I think you look at where we are right now. So if you look at where we are, we're not necessarily delivering Spanish to the way we are with other subjects, or the way we would typically with face-to-face learning. So I would say to the first part of the question that we would prioritize other things because we can't deliver it with fidelity as we have. But it's also financially too, when you look at that side of the ledger, if we do bring it back a year from now, this isn't really a true cut to the budget then, because then ultimately we'll have to, find a reduction elsewhere. So if we were able to find it elsewhere, so I think to answer your question, Tony, it's both really. I mean, if we could, if we could find it elsewhere, we would. But until we're back to face-to-face learning, it's not at the level that we would would want or expect, or to be able to deliver. So there would be other things to prioritize.
The other thing I want to say is now going to completely undermine my earlier point, but as I'm thinking about this, and I feel both of these things. I know it's conflicting. We feel all of these things. But since distance learning works so much less effectively for the youngest students, because it's true, I would argue, right, Laura? I mean, it's hardest for the littlest kids. Then why are we looking to reduce further in that area? And why aren't we looking to reduce in one of the older grades if we have to reduce in the academic side? And I realize it's completely counter to what I just said, but as I'm thinking about it, it's like, why aren't we thinking about other reductions that don't impact the littlest kids even more than they're already impacted? And now I'll be quiet.
I wouldn't even say age. I would also say the number of kids that are impacted by this program drop. It's not even age. It's like you look at other programs that are 6 digits that are only impacting, let's just say, 16 students or 20 students. I mean, you're talking about a budget line item of 0.07%. I am very confident that we could find elsewhere other than a programmatic cut. That 0%, I just want to go back to that 0%. The intention of drawing up that 0% budget line item cuts was to stay as far away from programs and students as possible. And that was not achieved because every single one of those items, or I would say majority of those items, were student focused or program focused. So I would hate to say we're going back to that list when I don't think that list accomplished the original objective to begin with. I'm just going to say it again. I absolutely would not support this cut whatsoever.
Tony, I mean, what's quite reasonable here, and that's why the third agenda item is setting a second meeting to come back to this. It might be that you feel that right now, at least on this item, you're going to ask us to see if we can modify this and find another place to go. I think that's a very reasonable request. We do need to be cautious of timing here, though, because if there's staff implications, this is about the latest, as I know, in Weston, they've had to make potential staff adjustments, but that would be reasonable. I just want to put that on the table if need to do that. I would say that the exercise of going to zero, though, I think, because we've made, since I've been here, about $3 million in cuts away from the classroom. So we've run out of places to go. We've cut a lot of administrative positions, support positions. So I think, we can find, and we may see some other places we can find some savings. But I just, what we're going to be up against, particularly if we have to go into our own budget for COVID-19 coverage, we're going to be in there on these academic discussions. But if you want us to go back and look, we can go back and look. Every week now there's some new developments, and there may be ways that we can at least cover that 43.
Can I say something first before we go that route? What I'm hearing is we're cutting the FTE, not our commitment to world language K through 2. I heard Laura talk about assemblies, and I know Ken has been working on ideas for books and changes to the curriculum that are going to bring in new concepts with respect to world culture. And I know there are great tools too. The kids in K through 2 are already doing Dreambox, Lexia, those types of things. I think the Duolingo Spanish apps are great if anyone's tried those. I think some part of the school uses them. Just because the FTE is being cut doesn't mean that we have to cut our commitment to world language K through 2. And I think we can do it through other means and still accomplish a goal of creating global citizens in grades K through 2.
Listen,
I think that was my original question, was what kind of creative other ways can we supplement it? I think that's right.
Well, basically, if Lisa, Laura, and Ken feel that this is not an appropriate cut and we can find it somewhere else, then I'm fine with that too. If they support this cut because this is the one that's from the perspective of what they see in the fall, this is probably makes sense. I support that as well. I'm, taking their recommendation really.
Right.
I just wanted to weigh in on my point of view. And this takes us back to even the pre-COVID budget discussions. And one clarification, it's 10 minutes, correct? It's 10 minutes, not 20, 10 minutes, right?
10 minutes a day.
10 minutes, yes, 10 minutes a day, 4
Okay.
days a week, K2.
Okay, so it's my opinion, given what I've observed, and that and I go to effectiveness. I advocated pre-COVID that be, to my chagrin, being a native Spanish speaker, saying that there were more efficient ways to deliver Spanish in the school. I've witnessed it with my child. I've witnessed my wife has subbed as a Spanish teacher in multiple grades, and my bar may be a little bit high, but in my opinion, it is not effective. So by cutting this, we're not foregoing anything. Duolingo is a wonderful tool, and while it would have to be administered, I think there's a way to do it. So I'm actually supportive of this because it's something I brought up pre-COVID. I don't think 10 minutes a day at that grade level is that effective.
How I think the recommendations of okay, if it's the FTE cut, fine, but then what other ways can we infuse it into the curriculum? But what I just heard Laura say is that no one's qualified, or there isn't then time allotted to actually put it into the curriculum. Correct, Laura? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, the program as it is now, the world language program, is a pretty robust program. The 10 minutes a day is entirely taught in Spanish, and the lessons are with our curriculum, so it reinforces grade-level concepts within those lessons. There are certainly ways we can offer opportunities for around global citizenship, around other languages. We won't be teaching them to speak and understand Spanish. We'll be exposing them to cultures. Lisa and I have talked about some ways we can bring in, conversations with other schools, a school in Guatemala. We can certainly do some assemblies. We will not be teaching them to speak and listen to the world language. It would look very different. And, when we come back without knowing what model we're going to have, we're really just going to have to look at the time that we have the students and what's the best use of that time.
If I could just take a second and move away from this for a moment, just for a moment, on other questions on the operating budget. So if this is the only one, we can come back to it, but maybe if there's other questions on other line items in terms of budget adjustments, we should put that on the table as well.
Just wondering why, we see savings in transportation as it relates to ESY and out of district. If we're making the call that we can reduce some academic programs because we may be in district distance learning, why are we not making the call to have some reductions to regular transportation as well?
Well, Gina, so one of the reasons that we have right now for transportation is because of the additional costs that may be involved with social distancing requirements that may be needed on the buses. In addition to that, another factor as well is the need to hire additional bus monitors on all our runs. So that is a primary reason why we did not cut any further into transportation.
Thank you.
And Mike can speak to this. This is substantially around the ESY, the summer program, where it will be fully distance learning. I think, Gina, the fall costs are going to be gigantic, as I shared with the finance committee this morning. If the state requires it when you run a bus, you have a bus monitor on the bus, which is potentially coming at us, as I learned this morning. That's why we're again, it's trying to go step by step. What can we decide now? Nail it down. This savings of nearly 56 was very clear and definite without putting at risk high cost pressures that may come in the fall.
Got it. Thank you.
I just had it's really, really small clarification question. Is the starting number on the top of the chart that I think, Ken, you mentioned that it made reference to Craig Tunks. Does that already include the benefit of the Craig Tunks overlap, or like the starting point?
No.
No, this does not include benefits. This is just strictly turnover savings, because we cannot make an assumption on any benefits because the assumption is that the person coming in would be taking benefits.
Yeah, Victor, I think your question was, is that top number already adjusted? No, that there's a $36,000 figure that's in the adjustment. That really is the adjustment.
Okay. Got it.
So I guess at this point, if there's no questions on the line items, we're still stuck on the K2 Spanish. Are we ready for a motion, or do we basically need to push this off to another day to find $45,000 somewhere else?
Hey, Bill, in all of your conversations with the other superintendents, obviously everyone else is in the same boat, and everyone is expecting, being hit with costs for unexpected costs in the fall. Is there any dialogue of shared services among districts?
I mean, there's constant talk about how to coordinate, but not that would get us any sort of major significant savings. If you were to give some examples, might speak to that, but we don't see, especially as you would think about, we don't really see where we could get advantage from shared services. We don't see those. When we're in operation, we try and get those with special ed transportation, but that's on a student by student basis. We don't, see that opportunity. I think right now the shared service is all us listening together, advocating together. So for example, today we learned, as the finance committee heard, that CAPS is estimating a $300 million expense across the state for all districts if we have to open up in the current design that the governor's thinking about. We don't know if that's going to be final, but that $300 million, that's highly dependent on federal and state money. So the shared effort is advocating. But the actual, we could get specific. I mean, it's a helpful question. We're not seeing easy places where shared services would bring any kind of substantial savings.
Tony, I know that this doesn't help us come to an answer about the K2 world language, but do you have any thoughts as to why Board of Finance, knowing that we're going to get hammered with additional costs that weren't in the budget as it relates to COVID, still felt the need to take this 120? Like, I mean, I understand we're trying to keep taxes as low as possible, but I mean, this is bordering on a level of ridiculousness at what we're trying to cut now. Because whether or not we actually end up keeping K2 world language, to my question about transportation that Phil answered, we're going to be hit with so many other costs. Like this 120 could be critically important to us.
Yeah. Well, listen, they absolutely. And I think that there was a lot of discussions around that. And you know what? For a period of time, I thought we would end up at 2.28, right? And without any further reductions. But I think that the board was, as you know, the vote was 4-3. And even to get a 4-3 vote, there was some heavy negotiation around what to take from education, what to take from the reserves, and ultimately what to take from capital. Now, it's kind of interesting because what they take for reserves was ultimately the COVID cost savings, right? So basically that seemed to be the cap, right?
I know, but that number was they took the number that was actually higher than our actual savings. So potentially, I mean, it's not final, potentially we're going to have to take from ISF to even cover that number. Like at a certain point, it's overly aggressive.
It is, but the alternative then, there was other numbers that are on the table that were even more aggressive, including ultimately splitting $1 million between town and us, 80-20, which would have left us with an $800,000 reduction. That was on the table for a while as well. So, 120 is bad. 500 is worse. 800 would have been a disaster. So it's kind of where we are. And you're right. You know what? Once you get to the numbers like that, which is 100, 120, I think ultimately it's basically a compromise amongst all the Board of Finance members to get to a number that works for everyone, right? I don't think that once you get to $100,000 range, I don't think you can put a specific reason why that is better or worse than any other number, right?
If I may suggest, Tony, I mean, you could put a motion on the table here that would separate out the K2 world language and that dollar equivalent. If the board was ready to vote on everything else, you could say that, motion with that 43-1 to be determined, but by approval of the board, we could then see as administration, if we can come back to you with something else. I think that would be quite reasonable. We have, none of us wanted to put this on the list. We put it on the list because it did have a rationale. It was very clean and tight. We totally hear and understand the board's concerns here. I also know we're going to be in a budget cutting discussion over the summer and as we hit the fall, because as I learned this morning, masks for all students, temperature checks, bus monitors, staffing 1-to-10 classroom ratios, school cleaning at a much higher level, PD possibly mandated. That's that $300 million estimate across the state, do the per capita. So we're going to be looking at a lot of potentially significant cuts. Again, we can keep this fairly neat here for the board. If you want to put a motion, take this one out now. We could come back to you quickly with something else for the 43 and we can, again, nail down the FY21 budget, get that figured out, the chances are we're going to have to be talking about much bigger numbers than 43. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no,
We wouldn't come back to
I think that's a good suggestion, Bill. I do.
I think if people feel comfortable with that, I'm fine with that. I do agree during the course of the summer, we're going to be faced with, my view of, moving around bigger numbers, but I'm fine with that. I mean, if the rest of the board members feel strongly about keeping it as is, we can just do a motion to approve as is. If the board members feel like we can put a placeholder there for that amount, you could come back with some alternatives. That's fine as well.
Laura, what do you think?
I think it's a fantastic program. I think we're in a very unusual situation now. So knowing how we're coming, it's hard to say. I think it is going to be a challenge to fit everything in if we only have this part of the time in the building. That's the reality. We've thought about a lot of the possibilities, but until we know what the model looks like, we really can't put the time to that and the minutes to it. I do worry about pausing the program and not getting it back.
Yeah.
No, it's
We still have a couple of big hires to fulfill, obviously, in the district. I like Bill's suggestion to make a motion to approve everything but this, and then we'll see how the next month or so shakes out.
Well, you're going to approve a dollar amount that includes a number, 45,000, but it will basically then have to be filled in with some specific item that we're going to cut.
And we have to have that done by June 30th.
Yeah. Okay. And another question, if we have another $100,000 that we have to make room for, would K2 Spanish come back on the list?
I mean, I think they're going to start to be a set of trade-off kinds of conversation. So we'd bring back to you a list to say to afford the third grade additional section and discuss the class size at that point. We started that earlier, and we could say to afford that, here's some ways to pay for it. I mean, we'd lay that all out for you, so you would have that trade-off conversation then.
Yeah, but practically speaking, if you had another $100,000 that you had to cut, would K2 Spanish be on the list? I mean, that's pretty simple, right? Would it or wouldn't it be?
I mean, based on what we're hearing now, I mean, none of us want to have it right now. A sense of the board is it wouldn't be, but we'd have to then see, because, I mean, I hope you all heard that $300 million number, do the math on that.
Right.
I mean, we're going to be facing some pretty big costs. And the Board of Finance was very clear, look within first and then come to us. And that, and now we can look within and say, sorry, we can't afford it, and go to the Board of Finance, but that's for you to decide. I guess the simple answer would be, sure, we'll put it back on the list, but I'm listening, and the sense right now is try not to touch this program. So it may be that as time goes along the path, there are other ways to cover the 100.
Okay.
My worry, Tony, as you know, is we're going to be looking to find $750,000 to $1 million.
Yep.
That's the kind of numbers we're going to be looking at.
Yeah.
My hunch.
Yep. So I think that to get through this, we should have a motion. We should basically keep the $45,000 and have a placeholder there, and you'll come back with some options for where to fill that. Is that all right with everyone?
And if I may, from a timing standpoint, I guess we would add that to the agenda for a week from tonight. That's one advantage of you setting the meeting tonight. So then I think that would be soon enough so that this budget is fully adopted, because I don't think you want to adopt it on a placeholder at 45,000.
We
Right.
did it once before.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you. I mean, you decide, but we could bring back to you, at that point, you might say, we're still not satisfied, and then approve a budget at a placeholder.
Yeah, I think we have to basically, ultimately we have to basically vote on the number, right? So I'm fine to vote on the number next week or do it tonight with the placeholder. I think it's equally as valid because that's the number we have to actually meet anyway.
So I'm sorry, I wasn't. What I meant was you vote on it tonight with the motion that the details on that placeholder number will be brought to you at the next board meeting.
Yeah, okay.
But you are adopting tonight the number that allows you to make sure, yes, the FY21 budget is balanced
Okay.
at the start of the year.
But I just want to make clear that I'm kind of looking around the room, and I just wanted to be sure that I heard Laura correctly. That Laura said it would be pretty hard to make these 10 minutes of world language effective under distance learning. Is that what I heard?
No, what I was saying was we don't know what the model is yet for us coming back. Are we coming back full time with the students? Are the students going to come without knowing the model? I don't know how we're going to schedule the time. And I think was what some of the board members brought up at the beginning of the meeting was the reality is we're going into a very different school year, and how are we going to structure the time? What are going to be the priorities? I've been very impressed with what our Spanish teachers have put forth in distance learning.
Okay.
The majority of our students are not accessing those resources, but they have been extremely creative. They have students who are able and willing to are submitting videos of them describing objects in Spanish, which we didn't have.
No, that's fine.
Really amazing creative teaching that students are producing a lot of language, the ones who are participating.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I got that clarification for my own benefit. Okay, Tony, sorry.
You have a motion? It's going to be a very interesting motion, but.
Does anyone have language?
I'll give it a whirl.
Okay.
Move that the Weston Board of Education adopt the amended operating budget of $54,161,443 with the details per attached, with the exception of the $43,161 specified as PAWS K2 World Language Program. Details of that reduction to be forthcoming.
That's great. Can I have a second?
Second.
Who second? Ruby. Thanks, Ruby.
If you just second with your name, that helps Meredith.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ruby.
All in favor? Let's just have a roll call.
Taffy,
Ruby.
aye.
Ruby, aye.
Gina, aye.
Melissa, aye.
Hillary, aye.
Victor? You're on mute.
Victor, aye. Sorry.
Tony, aye. All opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Gina, are you sending that? Sorry, Tony. Gina, are you sending that motion language to Meredith?
I think Meredith's just going to have to listen to the meeting.
Okay.
I don't think you can reproduce that one.
Gina, you're good.
Well, fortunately, we recorded your art, so we'll have your art.
Right. Let's go through the capital budget now.
Okay, Phil, are you running through that? It's basically one item adjustment that's not to vote on, just as an advisory to you all.
Try to make out the exact amount. So you guys may recall that the Board of Ed, approved a capital budget of approximately $632,324. When the Board on the 4th, when the Board of Finance approved the budget that was put forward capital was $692,324, which is $60,000 more than what the board approved. I found out from the town that the Board of Selectmen added 60,000 to cover the high school track replacement, which now brings the budget to 324, sorry. So it's pretty much was an add to a sinking fund for track replacement in 5 years. And this is going to be an ongoing or an annual addition to the capital budget for the next 3 years.
Well, that will fully fund the track replacement.
If we put that in currently, because we know that there's going to be additional work that will be needed, we should have, the hope is to have approximately 600,000 in that account. I'm sorry, 5, 6, that's only 3. No, that will not be enough to cover the full project. The full project cost is going to be $600,000 approximately. So we may need to have further discussion about how to add additional monies to the capital budget to cover the overall cost of this, or just have an ongoing discussion.
Can we take a pause and just have a process discussion for just a slight moment? Tony, I've got high school athletes. I love taking care of our athletic facilities, but how did this come about that we're creating a sinking fund for the high school track without us ever being involved in it?
I was never involved in it. This came last.
Well, that's what I'm saying. How did we? I mean,
I have no idea.
Because to the point of, like, if we're facing drastic reductions for academics, and then we're stockpiling $60,000 a year for a track replacement, when to me, if we're talking about prioritizing education at this point in time, and I'm sorry, we got plenty of people in this town that can fund that track replacement if we get to put up in that moment in time. I mean, we funded lights on 2 fields. We funded lights on a Little League baseball field. So if we've got to spend $60,000 of tax money right now, I would rather spend it on the kids than stick it in a.
I agree. Honestly,
I totally agree.
Yeah, I was not involved in the discussion. I didn't even know the number ended up to be different, actually, until Phil brought it up to me. So
good hunting, Phil. Nice work.
Well, it was brought to our, Phil, do you want to explain how this came to our attention, or do you want me to?
Go ahead, Bill.
All right. Phil noticed the $60,000 differential from the approved budget from the listed budget. Phil reached out to Jonathan, and it was explained that that had been shifted from the Parks and Rec capital budget in town budget, if you will, into the Board of Ed's capital budget, all town. So it was sort of moving it from one place to the other. But that was, I think, last week, we learned of this, and then we said we need to bring it as an update to the Board of Ed. But we were not, none of us were party to this shift. Now, whether it's just a matter of it being 60 somewhere, and I hear all of your concerns greatly, whether it's in the town budget anyway, and they just wanted to put it within the Board of Ed, there is an optics issue there clearly, though. So anyways, just
I doubt there's extra money there, but I will find out from Jonathan what the rationale was for doing that, because I never had a discussion with him.
If there's money to be given back to the Board of Ed, I think we've just answered our question about world language and K-2.
I wouldn't count on it. But
yeah, it's a separate fund. It's a separate money stream. It's capital. But I think the other point is there are things we took out of the Board of Ed capital budget that, assuming we're back in school, remember how important the lockers are. That's about that price. There are other things that for you as a Board of Ed not to be part of the discussion about capital expenditures, dare I say, is wrong. You all should have been in that discussion.
Back to Gina's question about process. How did that happen? How did it happen? Why at what point is it sort of mandated for the town to be consulting with or discussing with at least the Board of Ed?
Jonathan should have called me. He just will call me. If he's just moving money around, if he's just moving money around, he should have called me before he did that. Really simple as that.
Okay.
I mean, this is an update item, and I'm glad we did this. because this isn't on us, frankly, and I hate to sound not nice, not about you all. But I would recommend, Tony, that as chair, you have the conversation
Yeah,
and express, the tenor here has been pretty clear.
Yeah.
I mean, and I will even say this, Tony. I mean, look, if we have to replace the track, you know, maybe for this 1 year, and maybe they've had a sinking fund if it's on the town side, but maybe this 1 year you divert the sinking fund back into operations. I mean, I don't know if we can do that now that they voted on the budget, but I'm just saying, if you're classifying $60,000 available for the Board of Education for fiscal year 21, I'm sorry, academics.
I don't think it was money that was created. My feeling is if it wasn't brought up to me, it was basically just moved from one bucket to the next. I doubt there's any money there. I mean, there's a question as to whether
There's money there. They're putting money in a savings account.
Right. That's right.
I'm just saying, for 1 year, I would rather make up $60,000 somewhere down the road and have $60,000 available for academic programming.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Anything else?
The last agenda item was determining if you need another meeting to resolve the budget, but I think you don't need to do that now because you voted on the budget. We've given you the capital update. Monday night, a week from tonight, we will round out for you. And I think we added as an agenda item, Phil, somewhere within the finance area, if we could, explaining to you what those items are that equal that 43,161. And we will put it with a motion because you'll need to adopt that as agreed to.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Great. Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Yeah. Be well.
Bye.
Be well.